Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. "20-year-old Ryan sped down the deserted highway. He had only recently gotten his driver's license, but he had felt confident behind the wheel since his youth. His first teacher was his father, with whom he used to race along these same empty roads when they visited his grandmother in the village. And now Ryan was returning from his grandmother's, but not alone, and he felt truly grown up, free and full of energy. It was an exhilarating feeling. Music blared in the car, and the trunk was packed to the brim with generous gifts. Ryan had come to the village to help his beloved grandmother with her garden. He felt genuinely sorry for the elderly woman. She had completely withered, like a blade of grass, holding on only through sheer willpower, but she couldn't break a habit of many years. Year after year, she sowed the beds, carefully tended the plants, and harvested in the autumn. She categorically refused to move to the city, closer to her adult children and grandchildren. So, relatives took turns visiting the old woman, helping her, talking and sharing news. After getting his license and his own car, a black used sedan, Ryan started visiting his grandmother more often than others. There were several reasons for this, and they all mattered to him. Firstly, as the youngest grandchild, the only boy among 6 sisters, both full and half, he had always been his grandmother's favourite. A special, invisible connection had long been established between them. They understood each other without words. Even now, next to his grandmother, Ryan felt as warm and cosy as in his distant childhood. Some men are attached to their mothers, but he was devoted to his grandmother with all his heart. Secondly, it was in this village that she lived, the beautiful Sarah, the daughter of his grandmother's neighbours. In childhood, she had seemed to Ryan like a nasty and boring girl, thin, pale, constantly complaining to her parents about the noisy boys he spent time with. The boys tried to get revenge on the tattletale whenever possible. Sometimes they threw dried berries at her back, sometimes they came up with offensive nicknames and shouted them right in her face. But one day, arriving at his grandmother's for the summer holidays, Ryan suddenly realized that everything had changed. Sarah had transformed from an awkward teenager into an astonishingly beautiful girl, and her character had changed too. She no longer complained about the boys, and didn't look at them with her former contempt. Sarah made witty jokes, laughed infectiously, and there were always interesting topics of conversation with her. She danced easily at the village club discos. In short, on the eve of his final year of school, Ryan realized he was in love and began to pay the girl attention. Sometimes he would give her a modest bouquet of wildflowers. Sometimes he would give her a ride on his bicycle to the post office. Sometimes he would help her carry a heavy bucket of water from the pump. But Ryan turned out to be just one of Sarah's many admirers. He had too many rivals, and the girl clearly preferred Tom, a guy from the next street. This fact, it seemed, only fueled Ryan's feelings more strongly. He decided to fight for his love, which he did tirelessly for almost 4 years. Sarah, like him, went to university after school. But Tom stayed in the village. His father was seriously ill, and his mother couldn't cope with caring for her husband and managing the household alone. Without the help of their eldest son, the family would have had a very hard time. So the guy stayed home, found a job, and continued to support his family in a difficult situation. Sarah came home every weekend, and the first thing she did was rush to her boyfriend. She missed him terribly during the week and eagerly awaited these meetings. Ryan thought he now held all the cards. Tom had stayed there, in the village, while he, Ryan, was in the city, right next to Sarah, and he had even gotten his license. His father had even given him a car after that. Wasn't he an enviable catch? But Sarah continued to treat Ryan only as a friend, nothing more. Her heart belonged to Tom. Ryan couldn't understand the beauty's choice and refused to accept that she preferred someone else to him. He continued to persistently pursue Sarah's affection. "You're a good person, a very good person," the girl told him more than once. "You'll definitely meet your love, fall in love with someone. Look around, there are so many beautiful girls." "I only need you," Ryan stubbornly insisted. "But that's impossible," Sarah shrugged. "Tom and I are getting married soon." Ryan tried to convince the girl that she was making a huge mistake, showered her with bouquets of roses and gifts, which she eventually simply stopped accepting, and even stalked her. He hated Tom, with whom he had played a lot in childhood. He pointed out to Sarah what he considered obvious flaws in his rival, but nothing helped. After studying for 2 years in the city, the girl transferred to distance learning to be near Tom and help him care for his father. This was something Ryan simply couldn't comprehend. His feelings for Sarah still wouldn't cool down. The girl was right. There were always many beauties around Ryan, but for some reason none of them caught his attention. Ryan often visited his grandmother also because of Sarah. Seeing her even from a distance, admiring her walk, her long, dark, shiny hair, her huge green eyes, that in itself was happiness for him. It was a shame the girl no longer spoke to him at all. It seemed she even feared him a little, trying to keep her distance. He had certainly overdone it with his persistent courtship. But Ryan wasn't about to give up now either. A truly insidious plan was brewing in his mind. The guy decided to approach it from another angle, from Tom's side. He planned to somehow show up at his work during the week with a couple of his friends, tough guys with determined looks, and have a serious talk. If he could manage to intimidate Tom and force him to break up with Sarah, who knew, maybe the girl would then pay attention to him. She would need support, involvement, and he, at the right moment, would of course be there, ready to offer his shoulder. This was exactly what Ryan was thinking about now, pressing the gas pedal to the floor. The road was smooth and empty. He could really pick up speed. The guy felt like he wasn't driving, but flying over the asphalt. Dense forest bordered the road on both sides. The leaves were already starting to turn yellow. Soon the trees would be dressed in the golden and crimson outfits of autumn. Ryan hoped that by then Sarah would finally be his. Of course, the guy understood that his plan, to put it mildly, reeked of baseness, but he believed that in love all's fair. Sarah had to be his, period. Ryan had been used to getting what he wanted since childhood. It had always been that way, without exception. Suddenly, the guy noticed a small dark dot in the distance. It separated from the edge of the forest and quickly approached the highway. Ryan slowed down, becoming wary. Maybe a large animal was crossing the road. Twilight was already deepening, making it hard to see anything ahead. The distance between Ryan's car and the strange object was relentlessly shrinking. Soon the guy understood. It wasn't an animal at all. A child was standing on the side of the road. It was incredible. The nearest village was about 50 kilometers away, and the city was just as far. This place was completely deserted. How had a little boy ended up here? Had he gotten lost? Ryan stopped next to the child, opened the door, and looked closely at the boy. He was clearly in a state of deep shock. A dishevelled, frightened boy of about 10, trembling violently. His clothes were wrinkled and torn in several places. The child's face seemed vaguely familiar to Ryan. "What happened?" he asked the boy, trying to speak calmly. The boy tried to answer, but only a choked gasp escaped his throat. Ryan understood. It was from the fear he had experienced. His voice simply wouldn't obey him. "What happened?" The guy repeated his question, trying to make his voice as gentle and friendly as possible. And then the boy burst into tears. Tears streamed from his eyes. He cried, shaking all over, although he was clearly trying to suppress the sobs tearing from his chest. Ryan's heart ached with pity for this terrified child. The poor thing must have gotten lost, suffered fear and loneliness. The guy got out of the car, walked up to the boy, and did something that was, in fact, completely out of character for him. He tightly hugged the kid, pulled him close. The child immediately relaxed in his embrace and cried even harder, burying his face in Ryan's chest. Ryan stroked the boy's head and repeated that everything would be all right now, that the worst was over. "No, it's not over." The boy suddenly looked up at him. "Mom is there. Uncle Dennis is keeping her locked up, and now that I ran away, he'll kill her." "What?" A nasty chill ran down Ryan's spine like an icy stream. The theory of a boy lost in the forest, which had so neatly formed in his head, crumbled to dust after these terrible words from the foundling. Everything was much more serious, much more frightening, if, of course, the boy was telling the truth. "He took us away and kept us in a cage for a long time. Mom helped me escape, but he came back when I was leaving. I heard his car coming towards the cabin. Now Mom will have a hard time because of me," the boy said, choking on tears. A forest cabin, cages. Ryan couldn't fully understand what had happened there yet, but it all sounded terrifying. The guy suddenly realized that he himself was in potential danger. What if this mysterious Uncle Dennis ran out onto the road now looking for the child? "Let's call the police," Ryan suggested to the frightened boy, trying to stay calm. "They'll come, and you can tell them everything, okay?" "Yes, just hurry!" The boy was in a real panic, trembling. He was clearly very worried about his loved one, literally beside himself with fear and helplessness. Ryan looked at the child more closely. Large grey eyes, a slightly upturned nose, a scattering of freckles on his tanned face. Of course. The guy suddenly remembered where he had seen this boy before. Just a couple of weeks ago, a woman and her child had gone missing in the city. They had gone to the cinema and hadn't returned home. Their photos were plastered on all the lampposts, and these pictures kept appearing online. And then the news, as always happens in such cases, lost its urgency and relevance. A school burned down in the city, and another major incident occurred. Now everyone was talking only about these events, and the search for the woman and child, although it continued, no longer attracted the same widespread interest as before. And now, standing before Ryan, was that very boy whose photos had been so frequently seen everywhere recently. The guy even remembered his name. "Is your name Leo?" Ryan asked, looking into his frightened eyes. "Yes," the boy nodded, his voice trembling. "Call the police quickly. Mum doesn't have much time. He'll get angry." Ryan, without losing a second, dialed the necessary numbers and briefly explained the situation to the dispatcher who answered the call. He asked for a police unit to be sent immediately because a woman, the mother of the boy he had found on the road, was presumably in danger in the forest. The guy could only explain his location approximately, but he was assured that his mobile phone signal had already been tracked and recorded, so they would definitely be found. All that remained was to wait, and this waiting seemed agonizingly long. Ryan invited the boy into the car so he wouldn't freeze on the roadside in the twilight. The child settled into the passenger seat next to the driver, still trembling. Maybe you want some chocolate? Ryan remembered he had an untouched bar in the glove compartment. Leo shook his head negatively, not taking his eyes off the forest. It was understandable. He wasn't thinking about chocolate now, with his mother in danger. Ryan saw that the boy was in a terrible state from the stress he had experienced and his anxiety for his mother. The guy really wanted to distract the child with something to make him feel a little better, but he didn't know how to behave in such situations, and so he just sat silently beside him, his arm around Leo's thin shoulders. Despite his young age, the boy was a real hero. He managed to escape, find his way in the dark forest, run out to the road, and call for help. Ryan looked over Leo's head at the trees from which he had emerged onto the highway. What if that very Uncle Dennis was watching them from there right now, waiting for the right moment to pounce? Ryan remained on alert the whole time. If necessary, he was ready to slam on the gas and speed away from this dangerous place. Finally, flashing lights appeared in the distance, cutting through the darkness. The police! Ryan exhaled with relief, only now realizing the tension he had been under all this time. 2 cars and a large service vehicle with a small detachment pulled up. The people were wearing helmets and bulletproof vests, tall and sturdy, looking impressive. Uncle Dennis certainly wouldn't be able to handle them if he decided to show up. "See? Everything will be all right now," Ryan patted Leo reassuringly on the back. The boy looked at the people in uniform with hopeful eyes. His trembling had subsided a little. The boy was led aside by 2 men in plain clothes. They asked the child questions, probably trying to find out the details of this incredible story and clarify the location of the cabin where Leo's mother remained. Finally, the people equipped for the search operation rushed into the forest, while Leo, Ryan, and several police officers remained on the road. All they could do was wait, and this waiting was again agonizing. Ryan looked at the boy, who didn't take his eyes off the dark wall of the forest, as if trying to see his mother there. A woman in uniform approached Ryan, introduced herself as a police captain, and said she needed to take his statement as a witness. The guy nodded, understanding that he was now an integral part of this whole story, and he couldn't just leave. Time dragged on endlessly. It seemed like an eternity had passed. An ambulance arrived. Leo was taken inside. The doctors probably needed to examine him after what he had been through. "No, I'm not going anywhere," the boy's loud voice suddenly rang out. "I'm not going anywhere without Mom." Ryan realized that they wanted to take Leo to the hospital, but he couldn't leave until he knew his mother was okay. And Ryan perfectly understood the boy's feelings, his need to be nearby. The child jumped out of the ambulance and ran to him. Ryan took Leo's hand, squeezing it tightly. They stood together on the roadside and looked into the forest, which seemed calm, impassive, perfectly ordinary. Ryan had driven past this place many times during the 2 weeks the boy and his mother had spent in the cabin, and he couldn't even imagine that somewhere in there, behind the trees, something so terrible and unimaginable was happening. Finally, the first figures of police officers appeared from the forest. First came those in helmets and bulletproof vests. They were walking quickly towards their service vehicle. 2 sturdy guys were leading a man, plump, in a stretched-out red sweater and track pants with baggy knees. Ryan understood that this was the very Uncle Dennis, but he couldn't make out his face in the twilight. The man's hands were tied behind his back, forcing him to walk practically bent in half. The boy squeezed Ryan's hand tighter. His small palm was cold. He watched the man in the sweater with a frightened gaze until he was pushed into the large car. The car was already pulling away when 2 more police officers emerged from the forest. They were helping a slender woman with large grey eyes, exactly like Leo's, to walk. "Thank God she's alive." Leo rushed to the woman, hugged her tightly around the waist, pressing his whole body against her. She wrapped her arms around her son's shoulders, pulling him close. They both sank right into the grass on the roadside and sat there, silently looking at each other, unable to tear their eyes away. The police didn't interfere. They understood everything perfectly, their faces touched with sympathy. Ryan watched this touching reunion of mother and son, and his heart was filled with a variety of feelings: relief, joy, compassion. The guy didn't immediately notice that tears were rolling down his cheeks, hot and unbidden. This was the release of the emotions that had overwhelmed him all this time, accumulated during the long minutes of waiting. So much had happened in just half an hour. It was simply incredible. Right before Ryan's eyes, the plot of a real gripping thriller had unfolded, only here everything was real, without embellishment. The story ended well, thankfully. But the realization of what could have happened, what they had been through, sent a chill down his spine. The woman and the boy got up from the grass, tightly embracing, accompanied and supported by the police, and walked towards the ambulance. As they passed Ryan, Leo touched him with his hand and quietly, almost inaudibly said, "Thank you." Ryan just shook his head, not knowing what to say. What thanks could there be? And what exactly had he done that was so heroic? He had just stopped and called the police, that was all. And then the guy met the woman's gaze, the boy's mother. She had a beautiful face, regular features, and a smile. A beautiful, gentle, bright smile. Looking at her, it was hard to believe that this woman had endured so many trials. She had spent several weeks in captivity and had just been in mortal danger. But there was no sign of it on her. She radiated calmness and strength. Ryan suddenly felt a strong desire to talk to her, to find out exactly what had happened, to ask if she and the boy needed any help from him. But the woman and Leo were already being led to the ambulance, preparing to get in. As she entered the vehicle, Leo's mother suddenly turned back to Ryan and smiled at him again. The guy felt as if he had been struck by lightning from head to toe by that smile. It seemed that this smile made an even greater impression on him than the whole kidnapping story. Ryan understood that he would now remember this episode, this woman, very often. The city was stirred again by a story that had begun to fade from memory. The woman and boy, Veronica and Leo, were found alive. What had happened to them was a ready-made, terrifying plot for a real thriller. Mother and son had become victims of Dennis, a man with a confirmed psychiatric diagnosis. Many acquaintances of this man didn't even suspect that he was ill, that something was wrong with him. Dennis had friends and a job. He led a seemingly completely ordinary life. True, the 36-year-old man lived with his mother and didn't have a girlfriend, but that wasn't so strange nowadays. People arranged their lives in different ways. Apparently, Dennis saw Veronica's photo on social media and immediately fell in love with the beautiful woman. The presence of a child didn't stop him at all. The man tried to start a relationship with the beauty. He wrote her long, passionate confessions of his feelings, waited for her near her entrance with huge bouquets of flowers. But Veronica, first politely and then quite categorically, asked him to leave her alone. Dennis couldn't accept this. The idea of possessing her consumed him. Whether it was his character or a direct consequence of his illness, the man was determined to get his way, no matter what. He set up a cabin in the forest, prepared everything carefully, even insulated the walls. He planned to keep his captives there, even in winter. And then he took Veronica and Leo away when they were returning home from the cinema. Mother and son were searched for everywhere, Even the most incredible theories were considered, including that they had been taken to another country. And all this time they were very close by, literally just a few dozen kilometers away. He kept us in cages, Veronica shared in an interview, her voice calm, but her eyes serious. He didn't touch us, didn't hit us, didn't threaten us, nothing like that. He brought food, took care of us in his own way, talked to us a lot. But of course, we were very afraid of him. I immediately understood that this person was unwell and that anything, the most unpredictable actions, could be expected from him. Therefore, as soon as there was the slightest opportunity, I helped my son escape. He brought help. Thanks to him, we are saved. Veronica and Leo became famous throughout the country. They even flew to the capital for a popular talk show. Their story was now known throughout the country. It was discussed everywhere. Ryan was also invited to these shows and interviews, as he was the one who found the frightened boy on the road and became a key witness. But the guy refused. He didn't want all that fuss around himself. He watched Veronica from afar, looked at her photos in the news, admired her on the television screen. Yes, Dennis could be understood. There was something very attractive about this woman, some special magic. Not just her external beauty, which was certainly fully present. Charm, allure, charisma, something elusive that made people drawn to her. And then, after a few weeks, this amazing story, as it usually happens in the world of news, gradually faded, moved into the shadows. New topics for talk shows and scandalous articles appeared, new heroes and anti-heroes. And then, about a month after everything happened, Veronica suddenly wrote to Ryan in a messenger app. She probably got his number from the police who had taken his statement. The woman thanked the guy for his help and suggested meeting to discuss everything that had happened, to talk in person. Of course, Ryan gladly agreed to the meeting. He really wanted to see this woman again, hear her voice, learn about everything that had happened firsthand, without press distortions. After all, unlike other ordinary people, the guy understood perfectly well that he would never forget this story. It would stay with him forever. He often recalled Veronica's smile directed at him on the road that day and his strange feelings about it. And sometimes he dreamed of Leo, just as the boy had emerged from the forest, dishevelled, terrified, somehow crumpled and dirty, but with burning eyes. Ryan really wanted to know how the boy was doing now, whether he had recovered. The boy hadn't participated in talk shows, and almost nothing was said about him in articles. Obviously, Veronica was protecting her son from excessive public attention. Well, she could be understood. It was a wise decision. At the appointed time, Ryan arrived at the restaurant where Veronica had arranged the meeting. He saw her immediately upon entering. The woman was sitting at a far table in the corner, looking thoughtfully out the window, as if lost in thought. Long chestnut hair softly framed her narrow face with regular features. A dark turtleneck and tight jeans emphasized her graceful figure. She looked beautiful, composed, somewhat detached and mysterious. Seeing this woman, some strange, vague feelings stirred within Ryan. Nothing romantic, although Veronica's appearance certainly lent itself to such impulses. Ryan still dreamed only of Sarah. His heart was occupied by her. But Veronica clearly attracted him, intrigued him, occupied his thoughts with her unusualness. "Good afternoon," Ryan said politely, approaching the table. A strange, long-forgotten awkwardness suddenly came over him. And when the woman turned her gaze of incredible grey eyes on him, the guy even seemed to blush, which hadn't happened to him in years when interacting with the opposite sex. "Hello," Veronica smiled charmingly, and her smile struck him again. Finally, I can thank you in person, looking you in the eye." "But I didn't do anything special, really," Ryan replied, embarrassed. "I just called the police. It wasn't a feat. But your son is a real hero. He saved both of you." Well, how to say? Veronica's face clouded over for a moment, a shadow passing across it. "Leo. Before he met you on the road, he ran out to the road elsewhere, tried to attract attention. He saw 2 or 3 cars pass by. He waved his hands, shouted, called for help with all his might, but they drove past, didn't stop. But you stopped. You didn't ignore it." Ryan shook his head in shock, unable to believe what he had heard. He simply couldn't comprehend it. How could anyone ignore a small child's plea for help? He might have understood if people were afraid of an adult, suspicious man on a deserted highway in the twilight, but a boy, a 10-year-old child. Veronica seemed to read his thoughts, guessing his bewilderment. "It's not surprising," she said softly, as if justifying those people. "People don't need extra problems. They're afraid of the unknown. Who knows? Maybe they thought the child was bait, that if they stopped, a gang of criminals would jump out of the forest. Or they were afraid of something else. Everyone has their own fears. But you... If you hadn't stopped then, who knows what he would have done to me?" Seeing that Leo had managed to get away, he started acting very strangely. It was as if he was replaced. I had never seen him like that before. He was furious and desperate. Veronica started talking about him, about Dennis, about what happened after Leo's escape. She didn't look like a victim at all. In her grey eyes, Ryan noticed contempt, even hatred, but not a trace of fear. There was no sign of the horror she had experienced, only cold determination. It seemed Veronica was either a surprisingly strong woman with an unbreakable spirit or an excellent actress who managed to skillfully hide her true feelings and experiences. "He didn't hurt you?" Ryan asked. This question had bothered him all these weeks since they met on the road. In numerous interviews, this was tactfully omitted. Journalists avoided the topic. Veronica only spoke about being held captive in cages with her son. Dennis's cabin was even shown in one TV report. Ryan had seen those terrifying cages, essentially just a part of a room fenced off with bars and a solid brick wall. The smaller section held the boy, the larger one Veronica. In the corners of both rooms, Ryan noticed inflatable mattresses with blankets and pillows. It was terrifying and unbearable to imagine that mother and son had been in such conditions for several weeks. Well, how to say? Veronica pondered the question, choosing her words. Physically, no, he didn't touch us, didn't hit us. Of course not. He wanted to win my affection peacefully, to conquer me. He talked to us a lot, especially to me, trying to please me, to show his best side. He even sometimes brought dinner from an expensive restaurant for me and my son, as if we were his honored guests. But I felt, his patience was running out every day. He was becoming more and more irritable, angry, even crazier. The climax was very near. I felt it with every cell of my body. A nasty chill ran down Ryan's spine at these words, a shiver down his skin. He suddenly felt how defenseless and powerless Veronica must have felt in that forest cabin, how afraid she was of what might happen to her, and most importantly, to her son. "You asked if he hurt us," Veronica continued, looking him directly in the eyes. "Physically, no, thank God. Of course not. But how this nightmarish incident will affect my son's psyche and character in the future, even the most experienced doctors and psychologists don't know." "How is he, Leo?" Ryan asked, his voice full of sincere concern. Leo's fate interested him greatly. The guy was worried about the boy, hoping he was okay, that everything would turn out all right. He seems to be doing well now. He's gradually recovering, but Leo still sees a psychologist, attends sessions regularly. These sessions help, of course, it's noticeable. But sometimes my son wakes up at night from nightmares. He dreams of something terrible, although he tells me he doesn't remember his dreams. So, of course, this whole situation left a deep mark on him, a scar on his soul. And for that, and only for that, I hate Dennis. If it weren't for what's happening with Leo now, I would even feel sorry for him. He is a sick person after all. Strong feelings that he couldn't handle, and an illness that took over. And besides, he sincerely believed he was doing the best for himself and for me. In his sick mind, that's how it was. What? Ryan couldn't believe his ears. He was astonished. Veronica had just felt sorry for Dennis, her kidnapper. In interviews, she had behaved completely differently. Her words were full of indignation. Maybe I'm partly to blame somewhere, Veronica continued, her gaze becoming thoughtful. I saw that he fell in love with me at first sight. It was obvious. I didn't need him at all myself. He wasn't my type of man at all, didn't attract me in the least. But like any woman, I liked to flatter my ego, to feel desired. So sometimes I smiled at him, sometimes I met his eyes, allowed myself a little flirtation. His reaction was pleasant to me. He blushed so sweetly, was embarrassed, and his eyes literally lit up with joy and delight at my attention. Knowing that you drive someone crazy, your self-esteem soars to the sky from that. It's very pleasant. It's important for any woman, especially after another failed romance, when you feel insecure. But I read that this Dennis, that he saw you on social media and fell in love, Ryan began, recalling newspaper headlines. That's just an interesting story for the press, and also instructive, teaching young people to be more careful with online dating, not to trust strangers. In reality, it wasn't like that at all, Veronica smiled, her smile slightly sad. Or rather, not quite like that. The press distorted a lot. Will you tell me? Veronica smiled. Let's use first names. I understand I'm about 10 years older than you, but when you use formal address, I feel like a complete old woman, like I'm your teacher or an elderly neighbour. Ryan nodded, agreeing, and rephrased his question slightly. So, will you tell me how it really happened? To you? Well, I have to talk to someone, tell the truth. Looking at you, for some reason I'm sure you won't take this story to the press and won't gossip about it everywhere, looking for cheap popularity. No, of course not, Ryan answered sincerely. I just want to know how it happened, how it all started. I think about it a lot. About you, about Leo, about that day. It's not surprising. You also became a part of this story, a significant character in it, played an important role. Of course, I'll tell you everything if you have free time, because it will be long, very long. Ryan assured her that he was ready to listen until morning. He had no plans other than this meeting. And the woman, taking a deep breath, began her incredible, frightening story. Veronica became a mother early, while still very young. After her 3rd year of university, she went to the sea for the first time without her parents, in the company of friends. The beach, night discos, carefree fun, light wine. In short, there Veronica fell truly in love for the first time. And with whom? With an adult man, about 15 years older than her, experienced and worldly wise. But he was so handsome, also erudite and gallant, knew how to court beautifully. And importantly, he had money, which gave David opportunities for grand gestures. Restaurants, expensive attractions, gifts, all this, combined with the man's charisma, completely swept young Veronica off her feet. The man didn't hide that he was married. He honestly told her at the very beginning. He had come to the resort town on a business trip. Some important work conference was taking place there. Veronica, of course, was a little upset at first when she learned about his marital status, but then she decided to let whatever happen, happen. The main thing was that they were happy right here and now, in this moment. She needed to enjoy every moment, take everything she could from it. Thoughts of something serious and insurmountable, of the future, shouldn't cloud these wonderful days. However, the evening before saying goodbye to David, the girl couldn't hold back. Tears flowed from her eyes. She knew perfectly well that the man would fly back to his distant city tomorrow, to his wife and children, and they would never see each other again. Their paths would diverge forever. Veronica would be left without his blue eyes, with a sly squint and charming smile, without David's gentle but strong hands, without his scent, which made her heart sweetly stop and her head spin. "But don't, my dear. We had such a good time." David awkwardly stroked Veronica's back, trying to calm her. Calming crying girls was clearly not his forte. He was lost. The man couldn't find the right words to comfort his young lover at this moment of parting. "Give me your phone number, please," Veronica asked, tears in her eyes. "I'll at least call you sometimes to hear your voice, to know you exist." In reality, Veronica dreamed of more, hoped that with time David would understand how strong his feelings for her were, that she wasn't just a fleeting infatuation. But for that, there needed to be some contact, even if only by phone. "Ah, that's unnecessary, completely unnecessary." David tried very hard to make his voice sound soft and gentle, but the girl felt that he immediately tensed up after her request, became colder. "Everything that happened here, at this resort, will stay here. A holiday romance, my dear, it happens, it's not serious." Veronica looked up at the man who just a moment ago had seemed to her the best man in the world, her destiny. He said that phrase, holiday romance, with such indifference that the girl immediately understood. For David, this was commonplace, routine, and she herself was far from his only girl, not special. It was as if Veronica's eyes were opened, the veil lifted. It seemed that on every business trip, David found a new lover. It was his entertainment. The girl found the strength to break free from his embrace, turn proudly, and leave without another word. Of course, for her, it was a bitter disappointment, a blow, first love, and then such betrayal. But Veronica coped, survived the pain, became stronger. Only this wasn't the end of the story, but just its beginning. Returning home, the girl soon realized she was expecting a child. That was the real shock, the upheaval. Seeing 2 lines on the test, Veronica was probably truly frightened for the first time in her life. Icy fear gripped her heart. What to do now? How to live? There was so much unknown and frightening ahead. Explaining to her parents, setting up a new life, changes in her body that couldn't be hidden. Huge difficulties and trials clearly loomed on the horizon. And yet, Veronica firmly decided for herself that she would have this child, no matter what. That's how Leo came into her life, her little world. In the maternity ward, holding the tiny warm being in her arms, pressing him close, Veronica suddenly understood. It had all been for a reason, all the difficulties and worries, and the arguments with her parents, and the misunderstandings with friends, and the difficult pregnancy. Here he was, her gift of fate, looking at her with trusting grey eyes full of boundless love. For him, she was the whole world, his only support. Of course, Veronica's parents helped her a lot. They supported her physically and financially at a time when their daughter was so defenseless and vulnerable, in need of help. Of course, she had to tolerate their constant moralizing and lectures, listen to reproaches. They still couldn't understand that Veronica was now an adult, a mother herself, bearing responsibility. For them, she remained a small, foolish girl needing care. Therefore, as soon as she had the opportunity, Veronica rented a separate apartment for herself and Leo. The girl transferred to distance learning at the university, got a job to have her own income, and moved out of her parents' home, starting an independent life. At this moment, the woman finally felt completely free, independent. Life began to play with new, bright colours, full of hope. Leo grew up. Every day he became more independent and sensible. She could already talk to him as an equal. Veronica could now discuss various, even adult topics with him. Mother and son cared for each other, supported each other in everything, and enjoyed life to the fullest, both together and each in their own way, having their own interests. Veronica started meeting friends again. She occasionally had romances, light infatuations. The woman wasn't planning anything serious for herself yet, wasn't looking for a husband. She and Leo were happy living together. They were self-sufficient and didn't want to let anyone else into this harmonious, cozy little world to disturb the balance. Romantic relationships were needed by Veronica more to lift her spirits, to feel her femininity. Thanks to men, their compliments, attention, and admiring glances, she felt like a woman, beautiful, attractive, desired. She needed this like air. It was vital. Apparently, the old trauma from meeting David, who had made her feel like one of many, not special, still lingered. So now Veronica strove to feel unique, singular, needed by someone. This is what played a cruel trick on her with Dennis. The woman met him in the company of friends, quite by chance. They had interesting quiz games, intellectual quizzes, in their city. People, friends, acquaintances gathered in small teams, united by interests. Then a meeting was organised somewhere in a restaurant or cinema, and the host gave interesting tasks. Sometimes you had to guess films by dialogues, sometimes songs or performers by description. There were many challenges, and they were all fun, intriguing, unexpected, and made you think. Veronica liked discussing answer options with like-minded people, finding solutions, even arguing until she was hoarse. Their team never won prizes, but they didn't end up at the bottom of the list either, holding their own confidently. The core of the team was constant, unchanging. The ideological inspiration and leader of the group was Julia, Veronica's colleague, who had gotten her hooked on the quiz. With her were always the constant quiet neighbour, Lisa, and her husband Michael. And the other participants changed periodically, coming and going. Some, like Veronica herself, appeared from game to game, often skipped, but when they had free time, they came to the quiz meeting. Veronica knew these people mostly superficially. They were acquaintances, relatives, and colleagues of someone from the core team, Julia, Lisa, or Michael. Occasionally, the team was replenished with newcomers, fresh blood. Some of them didn't stay, played once or twice, and didn't show up again. Or on the contrary, they became regulars at the quiz meetings, became part of the group. Dennis became such a newcomer. Seeing an unfamiliar face at another game, Veronica, of course, was interested, showed curiosity. The man looked a little older than her, plump, with short curly hair, a bright shirt, colourful shorts, a fleshy nose, small attentive eyes that darted around. There was something slightly effeminate, not masculine, about his appearance. In short, he was somewhat awkward, funny, but seemingly harmless, not causing concern. He looked like either a hamster or a Pekingese. Such images came to her mind. Usually in films, such people have an easygoing nature and a good sense of humour. Dennis really showed himself to be kind and cheerful at that game. He joked a lot, laughed, guessed most of the answers, bringing the team to an honourable 4th place, which was a good result. A pleasant, easygoing person, not stressful. Veronica, of course, couldn't help but notice what a strong impression she made on him. Dennis, when he thought no one was watching, literally devoured Veronica with his eyes, openly admired her, looked at her with undisguised admiration. Sometimes their eyes met by chance, and then the man immediately looked away and, it seemed, was embarrassed, blushed. It was pleasant, flattered her ego. Although Dennis didn't attract Veronica romantically, not at all, he wasn't her type. She liked a different type, like Alex, with whom Veronica had broken up just recently and was still upset about the breakup. Because he was the one who ended their relationship for another woman, a young, beautiful girl with long legs and a wasp waist. Veronica had seen Chloe. She was a beauty, no denying it. Again, the woman felt rejected and heartbroken. Her self-esteem was shaken. An unpleasant feeling she was familiar with. Alex. Veronica had felt good and comfortable with him, but she didn't truly love him. She was just enjoying the moment, the casual relationship. Therefore, the breakup hurt not so much the woman's heart as her self-esteem, her pride. And Dennis, with his eyes burning with admiration, was now boosting that self-esteem, without even realizing it, playing the role of an unwitting therapist. So Veronica intentionally added fuel to the fire, stoked his interest. Sometimes she would smile at Dennis, sometimes she would praise another correct answer of his, emphasizing his intelligence. And sometimes she would even casually touch the man's shoulder, as if reaching for chips or cola, creating an illusion of closeness. He flinched every time at these touches, as if Dennis was being electrocuted. He trembled. This reaction, this embarrassment. Veronica was playing. She liked this feeling of power over a person. She liked feeling desired. And watching the effect her supposedly accidental gestures had on Dennis was a great pleasure for her, a kind of entertainment. At the end of the evening, everyone was standing on the porch of the bar and chatting. No one wanted to leave. The atmosphere was pleasant. They discussed the game, joked, shared impressions. But tomorrow was work, and people one by one started saying goodbye, going home. The crowd gradually thinned, melted away. It turned out that almost everyone had come in pairs, with husbands, boyfriends, or sisters, like Julia and Lisa. Only Veronica, as usual, had come alone, independent. But Dennis was also alone, without a partner. He, it turned out, had been invited by Lisa. They worked in the same office and often met in the smoking area, chatting. But Lisa, as usual, was going home with her sister and her husband, so Dennis and Veronica were left, as it were, unpaired, left to their own devices. "Can I give you a ride?" Dennis asked, his eyes shining with hope. He clearly expected a positive answer. "I'm driving myself, thank you," Veronica smiled, gently refusing. She felt her power over this man. Right now he would do anything she ordered, obey without question. But the woman wasn't going to cross the line. She didn't want to give false hope. Yes, it was very pleasant to feel that you had such a strong influence on a person, on a man, that he was ready for anything for you. But what was the point of blatant flirting if Dennis wasn't her type anyway, didn't attract her at all? Yes, he was kind, funny, humorous, peculiar, unlike others. But no, there definitely couldn't be any relationship between them. It was clear as day. "Okay then," Dennis sighed in disappointment, his shoulders slumping. "But we'll see each other again, right?" "Well," Quiz games are held about twice a month, sometimes more often, Veronica replied evasively, not giving a specific promise. If I'm free, maybe I'll come. And she slipped into her car, closing the door. She was already looking forward to the evening drive through the city, when there were few cars and pedestrians on the roads, and city lights sparkled everywhere, creating a magical atmosphere. Now she would turn on her favourite music, open the windows to let the cool wind blow through the car and fly forward, enjoying the speed and freedom. A wonderful end to the evening, she thought. Veronica missed the next quiz game. She had a lot of urgent work, and she had long promised to take Leo to the zoo to spend time with him. For some reason, the woman was sure Dennis had probably come to the meeting, and not just for the game itself, for the questions. He hoped she would be there, Veronica, waited for her appearance. And indeed, in the photos posted in the group a few days later, Dennis was captured. In some pictures, he looked somehow lost and disappointed, as if he was looking for someone and hadn't found them. Or maybe Veronica had just fantasized this whole story, attributed feelings to him that weren't there. And then, 2 weeks later, there was another game, and this time Veronica decided to go to it, to get out. She didn't have any urgent matters anyway. Leo's school holidays had started, things at work had settled down, returned to the usual routine. Why not meet friends, have a good time? The game was held in one of the city bars, in the centre. Veronica was a little late. She hadn't calculated the time and got caught in the evening traffic jam. When she entered the hall, everyone was already in their places. The team was assembled. Dennis saw her, his eyes lit up with joy, as if he had seen a miracle. Veronica pretended not to notice, greeted everyone, and took her seat at the table. This time Dennis was much more active, more assertive. He no longer hid his gaze, looking at Veronica, complimenting her, trying to help her with something, to serve her, sometimes bringing a drink, sometimes moving a chair, sometimes picking up a dropped pen. And when the waitress took a long time to bring Veronica's order, he caused a huge scene, attracting the attention of the entire room. Everyone in the company noticed Dennis's obvious interest and even started making harmless jokes about it, laughing. If last time such intrusive attention from the man had flattered Veronica's self-esteem, lifted her spirits, now it was burdensome and unpleasant, causing irritation. The woman tried to remain distant, cold, but at the same time polite, so as not to offend the person without cause. It was her own fault. She shouldn't have practiced her feminine charms then, played with fire. But Dennis, it seemed, completely failed to understand the hints, ignored them. He swapped places with one of the guys and was now sitting next to Veronica, constantly, as if by chance, touching her hand, attracting attention to himself. Veronica could barely wait for the game to end, said a hasty goodbye to everyone, and walked quickly to the parking lot, wanting to leave as soon as possible. This time she refused the offer to walk in the park with the large, noisy group, although she usually liked such walks. But Dennis was there now, and she knew he wouldn't leave her alone, would follow her. It was somehow awkward and inconvenient to rudely brush off the man in front of everyone, but Veronica wasn't going to tolerate his intrusive courtship either. He met her in the parking lot, as if he had been waiting. It was already dark, so Veronica didn't immediately notice that Dennis was waiting for her by the car, standing in the shadows. The woman even flinched in surprise when she heard his voice right next to her. "Can you help me, please?" he asked, his voice sounding a little agitated. "What?" Veronica tried not to look too annoyed, to hide her displeasure. She hadn't gone for a walk with friends only because that intrusive admirer was there, and now he was here, asking for some help, not leaving her alone. My car is in the shop right now, so I'm on foot today. Can you give me a lift to the centre? You're going that way anyway. Okay, sure. The woman smiled politely, hiding her reluctance, and opened the door for him, inviting him into the car. On the way, Dennis talked her ear off, talking about everything under the sun, non-stop, clearly trying to find a topic that would interest Veronica, to get her to talk. But she remained cold and distant, occasionally nodding, but not keeping the conversation going, answering in monosyllables. She felt somehow uncomfortable next to Dennis. His presence was tense. At their first meeting, he had seemed interesting, bright, unusual, an extraordinary creative person, someone who wasn't afraid to be funny and rejected stereotypes. Now Dennis just seemed strange and awkward, causing concern. She had hooked him badly. Veronica understood this perfectly. Dennis used every second they were in the car together to impress her, trying literally to go out of his way, even breaking a sweat from the effort. A pathetic sight, of course, but Veronica tried not to show her true feelings, politely smiled at the passengers' jokes, answered his questions in monosyllables, pretended to be carefully watching the road and not wanting to be distracted. And she waited for the moment when she could finally drop off her companion, get rid of his presence. Dennis's presence was very burdensome, oppressive to her. "I'll drop you off here," Veronica said, pulling up to a deserted bus stop. "Otherwise, I have to turn onto my road further on, in a different direction." Veronica parked near the deserted stop. Dennis clearly didn't want to part with her. He just sat there and talked about something, looking at her desperately with his small eyes. He was close to panic. His gaze was full of despair. It looked strange, very strange, abnormal. Veronica had never encountered anything like this before. She didn't know how to react. How could she politely get rid of this infatuated talker without offending him, without causing aggression? "I have to go," she interrupted her companion, glancing at the clock, which showed it was late. "My son is waiting at home. He's been alone for a while now." Maybe mentioning the child would cool Dennis's ardor a little, and the man would finally understand that she wasn't just a beautiful girl with whom he could easily spend time without obligations, but a woman with a child who had her own life and responsibilities. "So you have a son?" Dennis exclaimed, his surprise genuine. The admiration in his eyes didn't diminish, rather it even became stronger. "Yes, and he's completely alone at home right now. He's called me several times already, worried." "Go, of course, I won't keep you." Dennis reached for the door handle, preparing to get out, but then turned back and asked another question, looking intently at her. "And a husband? Do you have a husband?" "No, I'm raising him alone myself," Veronica blurted out automatically, without thinking, and immediately regretted what she had said, reproaching herself. She should have lied, said she had someone, a man. Otherwise it seemed as if she herself had given Dennis a reason for further courtship, opened the door for him. "See you?" The man smiled broadly, his face shining with hope again, and finally left the car. Veronica pressed the gas pedal to the floor with relief, eager to get away as quickly as possible. No, she was not going to meet Dennis again. That was finally decided. To avoid crossing paths with the unwanted admirer who had become a burden to her, Veronica stopped going to the games, stopped attending the quiz. Julia, of course, often invited her, urged her to come, but Veronica constantly came up with reasons to refuse, found excuses. It was a shame, of course. She liked spending time with these pleasant, cheerful people. It was good entertainment. But now Dennis had become a regular member of the team, and she didn't want to see him. "Dennis keeps asking about you," Julia shared with her colleague and friend one day, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "He's trying to get your phone number from me. very persistently. "I promised to ask you if I could give it to him. Well, can I?" "No!" Veronica exclaimed, her voice full of determination. "Absolutely not. Don't give him my number." "It's your decision, of course. I'm not insisting," Julia said thoughtfully. "But he seems like a decent guy, not stupid. He works, he's kind, very generous, and he has a good sense of humor. He knows how to make people laugh. And he seems to be seriously in love with you, truly. He's constantly trying to find out things about you from us, as if by chance, slyly. But nothing escapes me. I see everything." "Julia, please tell him that I have a partner, a man," Veronica asked, looking pleadingly at her friend. "Let him not even hope that he has a chance. He's just not my type at all, you understand? He doesn't attract me." "I understand, of course, what's there not to understand. It's clear. You stopped going to the quiz because of him, right?" Veronica thought for a moment and nodded, admitting the truth. She was tired of hiding the real reasons for her absence from her friend. "I need to tell Lisa to stop inviting him to the games," Julia said thoughtfully, making a decision. "He's a valuable team member, knows a lot, he's knowledgeable, but my friend is dearer to me. Her peace of mind is more important. And he works with Lisa, doesn't he?" Yes, her colleague. He works in the design department, as I understand it." Some more time passed, several months. And then one day Julia announced that Dennis was no longer coming to the quiz. He had missed several games already, wasn't showing up. "He realized you weren't showing up, lost all hope, and apparently lost interest in the games without you. He was only coming to the meetings because of you, it seems. That was his main motivation. So come back. There's nothing to be afraid of anymore. The coast is clear." But Veronica was in the midst of a new romance with a handsome, well-built guy, a little younger than her, an athlete. She had recently met him at the gym where she had started going. Tall, moderately muscular, stylish, confident, everything she liked, her ideal man. So now Veronica was going on dates with Ben in the evenings. She didn't have time for the quiz and old acquaintances. Only Dennis still found a way to contact her, didn't give up trying. He found her VContact page, apparently through mutual acquaintances, and started. The man looked through and didn't hesitate to like every single one of her photos, even the oldest ones. And now every day he sent her messages, sometimes congratulating her on a holiday, sometimes wishing her a good day, sometimes just sending cute pictures, kittens, flowers, hearts, like a teenager, like a child, honestly. Veronica, of course, didn't reply to these messages, ignored them. Any normal person would understand that's enough. They don't want to communicate with you. It's time to stop the pursuit. But not Dennis. He didn't give up. And then one day, Dennis sent her a long letter with an invitation to go to the premiere of a new film together. He suggested she bring her son too. He wanted to meet him, to join the family. Veronica replied that she was in a relationship. She had a man, and her boyfriend Ben probably wouldn't like that. After that, there was no news from Dennis for a couple of days. He went quiet. Veronica had almost decided that it was all over, the problem was solved. But no, the situation only worsened, took a sinister turn. One evening, leaving the office, Veronica ran into Dennis, who was waiting for her at the exit, smiling broadly. It was already December. There was a severe frost outside, a biting wind. It was unknown how long Dennis had stood by the office gates, waiting for the object of his love, freezing. His fleshy nose had turned completely red from the cold. The huge bouquet of roses in his hands was covered in frost, frozen. But the man seemed not to notice, not to feel the cold. At the sight of Veronica, his eyes lit up with a truly puppy-like delight, full of adoration. The woman didn't take the flowers from him then. She refused, and very harshly, sharply asked him to leave her alone to stop the pursuit. Yes, she had to hurt the intrusive admirer, cause him pain, but what else could she do if he didn't understand otherwise, didn't hear her words? "I will fight for you," Dennis said quietly, but firmly, looking sadly at Veronica, his gaze full of determination. "I know that you have to fight for love, and everything will be all right. We will be together." Veronica sighed heavily, sensing trouble, and headed for her car. All she needed was for him to actually start fighting for her. It could turn into anything. Dennis lay low for a while, disappeared from sight. For about a month, he showed no signs of himself, didn't make contact, and Veronica relaxed, even somehow forgot about him, decided that her problem was solved now. He had given up. Veronica had a wonderful New Year holiday, enjoying her time off. She went to a ski resort with Ben and Leo. It was their first trip together. They walked a lot in the snowy forest, rode sleds and inner tubes, built snowmen, had fun snowball fights. Under Ben's guidance, Veronica even learned snowboarding, which she was incredibly proud of. It was an achievement for her. But all good things come to an end quickly. The holidays were replaced by weekdays. Routine returned. Veronica went back to work, returned to her usual affairs and worries. One evening, closer to dusk, Ben called her. He was away on a business trip in another city at that moment. "What's going on, Veronica?" The man's voice sounded strange, either upset or confused or angry. "Everything seems normal, Ben," Veronica replied, not understanding anything. Her voice was calm. "What happened?" It felt like she was being accused of something, but she couldn't understand what exactly. Her conscience was absolutely clear. "So it's normal to meet another man while your boyfriend is on a business trip away?" "What are you talking about? I'm not with anyone," Veronica began, trying to explain herself. "Just don't lie to me. I trusted you so much, believed every word you said, and you—" "Well, I can explain everything to you. Listen. They've already sent me your photos. It's useless to deny it. It's all proven." "What photos, Ben? What are you talking about?" Veronica absolutely didn't understand what he was referring to, but Ben's voice sounded hurt, disappointed, and final. "We have nothing more to talk about, Veronica." Ben hung up, ending the conversation, and Veronica sat over her report for a long time afterward, trying to collect her thoughts, to understand what had just happened. And only when she got home did she finally understand what was going on, what had caused the breakup. When she went to her V-Contact page, there was another message from Dennis, which she had previously ignored. "Photos from our date. I love you, my dear." Veronica read the caption under the folder of files aloud, her heart stopping. The woman clicked on the yellow icon and gasped in surprise, shocked by what she saw. Before her were pictures. In them, she herself was posing in the arms of Dennis, who was looking at her lovingly. Veronica was smiling charmingly. Dennis was gently hugging her. In some photos they were even kissing, looking like a happy couple. Veronica had never been to the places shown in the photos, and certainly had never kissed Dennis. It was unthinkable. But the pictures looked surprisingly realistic, as if they were real. Someone had very skillfully edited the photos in a special program, clearly better than ordinary Photoshop. Dennis worked in the design department, Julia had said. He probably could do even more than that. These were his professional skills. But why? Why did he do it, spend the time and effort? And he even sent the photos to Ben, deliberately destroying her relationship. Apparently, she would have to tell Ben the whole truth about the intrusive admirer who had been bothering her for a long time. Dennis, now truly frightened Veronica, caused fear. Before this, he had only irritated her, been a burden, caused dislike and pity. But after this situation with the photos, he was genuinely frightening. His attachment to her now seemed like a real obsession, a pathological mania. And the man's mental health. It raised serious questions, doubts in Veronica's mind. A normal person just couldn't behave like that. It was incomprehensible. At that moment, a new message arrived from Dennis, as if he felt she was looking at the photos. "Just look, Veronica, how great we look together in these photos. I can't stop admiring our photos. They're perfect." Veronica called Ben, tried to explain everything to him, tell him about Dennis, but he wouldn't listen, was adamant. It was hurtful, annoying. If Ben had truly valued and loved her, he wouldn't have given up so easily, wouldn't have believed someone else's photos. Even this eccentric Dennis was fighting for her like that. No obstacles bothered him. He was going through with it. But here, perhaps Ben never had real feelings for her, sincere love. And to be completely honest, their relationship had become somewhat distant lately. They had drifted apart. The trip to the ski resort had briefly improved the situation, breathed life into it, but overall the relationship had run its course, become exhausted, and she had to admit it. Veronica was alone again. Her heart was broken, but not from love, but from disappointment. She blocked her VContact page so as not to be upset by Dennis's letters, to stop his attempts to contact her. She even got a job somewhere else, changed offices. And not just because Dennis occasionally met her at the gates at the end of the workday, waiting for her. She simply found a place with a higher salary, a better opportunity. Veronica stopped going to the quiz completely. Contact with old acquaintances gradually faded, broke off. The woman didn't have time to maintain these connections. A period had begun in her life: work, son, apartment renovations, household chores. Life had caught her up, spun her in its whirlpool. Dennis, to Veronica's great relief, finally disappeared from the radar, stopped appearing. Now he didn't know where to look for her, where she worked and lived. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say. This rule often works. Veronica sincerely hoped that the man had found a partner, a woman who reciprocated his feelings, and was now pouring out the entire stream of his unspent tenderness and attention on this lucky woman. Several more months passed. Autumn arrived. By then, Veronica had forgotten all about Dennis. He had become just an unpleasant memory for her. She had a new life, new worries and troubles, new plans. On that warm autumn evening, Veronica decided to take her son to the cinema, as they sometimes liked to do. Her car had broken down and had been at the service centre for a week, being repaired. So after the screening, she had to call a taxi to get home. It was already late. Buses were infrequent, and she and Leo were tired. It had been a hectic and busy day. Soon, a grey taxi car pulled up, stopping at the side of the road. Veronica and Leo settled comfortably in the back seat, buckling up. The driver, a plump man in a cap with a wide brim that hid his face, greeted them hoarsely and confirmed their destination, where to take them. Everything was as usual, an ordinary trip, and the car sped along the semi-empty city roads, picking up speed. There were very few cars on the streets at this time. Traffic was light. Veronica and Leo were engrossed in discussing the movie they had just seen, sharing impressions, so they didn't immediately notice that the driver had turned the wrong way, taken an unfamiliar road. Only much later, when dark fields and silhouettes of trees flashed past the windows, Veronica came to her senses, felt something was wrong. "I don't understand. Are we taking the bypass? Not through the city? That's far. We need to go to Peaceful Street. That's in a completely different direction, Veronica exclaimed, her voice full of bewilderment. The driver didn't answer her question, ignored it. Instead, the woman heard a characteristic click, a clanging of metal. The man had locked the car doors for some reason, preventing them from getting out. Veronica realized that something very bad, something terrible, was happening. A nasty chill ran down her spine, her heart beat faster. "What are you doing?" Veronica gathered all her willpower to make her voice sound authoritative and calm, without panic. All she needed was to scare Leo. He had already sensed something was wrong too, had fallen silent, tensed up. And then the driver turned around, turned his head. Veronica flinched. Terror seized her. She recognized Dennis. "I think I laughed then, nervously, hysterically," Veronica recalled, thoughtfully twirling a strand of her long chestnut hair around her finger. Meanwhile, Ryan watched her intently, catching every word, not missing a sound. She told the story so vividly, described the events so brightly, that scenes from a film seemed to unfold before the guy's eyes. He saw everything that was happening. And here was the climax. The main villain shows his true face. "Yes," Veronica laughed, but it was a nervous, hysterical laugh, a reaction to shock. The woman immediately understood. Things were bad. They were in trouble. The familiar face of the driver didn't calm her down. On the contrary, it caused even greater fear. Veronica realized she was trapped by the strange, obsessed Dennis. And worst of all, Leo, her son, was now in his power. What would happen to them next? The prospects were unclear and very vague, full of danger. "Right now! Stop the car!" Veronica gathered all her willpower to avoid looking scared, to make her voice sound confident and decisive. She remembered the influence she had had on this man before, how he had been ready for anything for her. Maybe it would work now? He was ready for anything for her, at least that's what he said. "I will stop, of course, but later, Veronica." Dennis was now watching the road carefully, his face focused. "Soon you'll understand that this will be better for all of us." "Better for whom?" Veronica asked, hope for a favorable outcome fading before her eyes, disappearing. "For you, for me, for him, for Leo, for all of us. We will be happy together. You'll see, we'll have a perfect family." "Where are you taking us, Dennis?" Her voice trembled despite all her efforts. "To a very good place, Veronica. You'll like it there, I promise." Then Dennis turned and winked cheerfully at Leo, trying to cheer him up. The boy sat frozen with fear, his eyes full of horror. The boy guessed something very terrible, abnormal, was happening. But what exactly, he didn't yet understand and was afraid to ask, clinging to his mother. The car rolled further and further down the country highway, carrying them into the unknown. Very rarely, other cars passed them. Traffic was almost non-existent. It was dark outside, pitch black. You couldn't see anything, couldn't orient yourself. Veronica didn't even have a rough idea of where they were now, where they were going. A sticky, cold fear churned in her stomach, paralyzing her will. "Let us go, please," Leo finally spoke up, his voice thin and pathetic. The boy looked so frightened and pathetic that Veronica's heart ached with pain for him. "Why, Leo, why?" Dennis gently, almost affectionately countered him, his tone friendly. So far, he showed no signs of aggression or anger, but who knew what would happen next, what was on his mind? "I want to go home to my place," Leo answered honestly, his voice trembling. "And what's so good there, Leo?" Dennis asked, as if genuinely puzzled. "Your mom will run off to work in the morning, you rush to school, always busy, lessons, tests, homework, clubs. I also know you go swimming 3 times a week, constantly training. Constant hustle and bustle. You hardly see your mum. Everyone has their own things to do. But with me, you'll be together all the time, as children should be with their parents, one family. I'll take care of you. I promise you, Leo." Leo sighed, his shoulders slumped, and he stared out the window into the darkness beyond. He tightly squeezed his mother's hand. His small palm was sweaty and yet very cold, like ice. And Veronica thought, analysing the situation. So, Dennis was taking them somewhere unknown to a place prepared in advance. Apparently, he had been watching them for a long time, preparing. He even knew that Leo went to the pool 3 times a week, knew their schedule. And he had ambushed them at the cinema. That meant he knew they had gone to the cinema, tracked their movements. Apparently, Dennis wasn't planning to do anything bad, in his own sick understanding, at least for now. So she had to behave quietly and compliantly, not to anger a sick person, not to provoke him. And Veronica no longer doubted for a second that Dennis was sick, mentally unwell. She had noticed some strange things about this man before, abnormalities in his behaviour. Take, for example, his bright, ridiculous outfits and his essentially inadequate behaviour. But at first it was all attributed to his creative nature, eccentricity, and then to a strong, all-consuming infatuation. Veronica chose her tactic: wait, observe the situation, don't provoke aggression, don't argue, don't object. And then she would see how to act, how to find a way out. Dennis turned off the smooth road onto some dirt road. The car shook over bumps, was thrown around violently. Veronica felt the bottom of the car scraping against the grass, catching on unevenness. It seemed they would get stuck any moment, get bogged down in a pit or road mud, unable to pass. But it seemed Dennis knew the way perfectly, this road. He drove steadily forward and forward, saying that they were almost home, would arrive soon. Finally, the man stopped the car, braked sharply. Before unlocking the doors, he warned, his voice becoming harsher. "Don't even think about running, Veronica, Leo. I have this, and I won't be afraid to use it." And with a gentle, somehow terrifying smile, the man showed them a crossbow lying on the front seat. Veronica didn't know if it was real or a sports one, but it looked impressive, dangerous, and quite deadly. "I'm a very good shot." Dennis was clearly proud of this fact. His eyes gleamed. Then he unlocked the doors and ordered his captives to get out. His tone brooked no argument. They obeyed. What else could they do? There was no choice. It was dark all around, pitch black. Not like in the city, when the outlines of objects are visible in the light from neon signs, streetlights, and house windows. No, it was impenetrable darkness in which nothing could be seen. All orientation was lost. Veronica only understood that they were in the forest, deep in the thicket. Dennis took her hand, firmly, but at the same time gently. Somehow, his touch was strange. "And you, boy, hold on to your mum tighter, or we'll get lost in the dark." Veronica nodded, agreeing. Leo had long since clung to her like a tick and was trembling with fear, pressed against her leg. The woman stroked her son's back reassuringly, trying to calm him, promised that everything would be all right, although she herself greatly doubted it. Dennis turned on a powerful flashlight and led Veronica and Leo after him, lighting the way. They walked for quite a long time. It seemed like an eternity. The woman and boy stumbled over roots and stones, but the man walked steadily and confidently, clearly having been here often and knowing where to step, every path. Finally, they reached the cabin. Right in the middle of the forest stood something resembling a village house, looking unnatural. A gable roof, shutters on the windows, even a small porch with shaky steps. "What is this?" Veronica was surprised, her voice full of bewilderment. The house in the middle of the wild forest looked too unnatural, fairy tale-like, like in a scary fairy tale or a horror movie. My grandfather and I built this a long time ago when I was little, Dennis began to explain, his voice becoming dreamy. They used to bring me to his village for the summer. We loved walking in the forest, wandering along the paths. By the way, he taught me how to handle a crossbow here, how to shoot accurately. We built this house for a long time. Grandpa said, "Who knows, maybe a war will happen and we'll have to hide in the forests, have a refuge." Veronica sadly concluded that Dennis's illness was apparently hereditary, passed down through the family. It seemed his grandfather was also a strange man, with quirks. "You know what a deep basement we dug under the house," the man continued to recall his childhood, his eyes shining. "And we made a warehouse of canned goods there, a large supply, just in case for survival. Come in, don't be shy." Dennis opened the unexpectedly strong, heavy door with a key hanging on a bunch and let his guests in first, gesturing for them to enter. He followed and immediately locked the door, cutting off their path of retreat. He took a kerosene lamp from a cabinet, lit it, and Veronica finally had a chance to look around in the dim light. Almost an ordinary room in a village house, simple and modest. In the centre, a round table on curved legs, several Vienna chairs around it. In the corner, an old worn-out sofa that had lost its shape. Near the wall with windows right between them, a tall, narrow cabinet, a simple and painfully familiar interior as if from the past. Veronica had seen something similar when she visited her cousin in the village as a child. But still, the room was sharply different from an ordinary living space. There was some eerie peculiarity about it. It was all about the bars with which someone, most likely Dennis himself, had fenced off part of the room, dividing it. It resembled a cell for dangerous defendants from a courtroom, only much larger. From the inside, this cage was divided by another wall, a brick one, solid, not letting light or sound through. It went from the floor almost to the ceiling, dividing the space into two compartments. Did you and your grandfather make this too?" Veronica, without expecting it, chuckled, giggled nervously. She suddenly felt somewhat cheerful, absurd, when she imagined this scene. Grandfather and grandson fencing off part of a room with bars, building walls of bricks in the middle of the room. It somehow looked delusional, unreal, but also funny in its awkwardness. "No, I did this myself, alone," Dennis admitted, his face becoming serious. "I was preparing for your arrival, Veronica. I even had to take time off work to get everything done, prepared." Veronica understood that she and Leo would now be driven into these cages, behind bars. She couldn't allow that. It would be the end. There, behind bars, Veronica would be too defenseless, too vulnerable, deprived of any possibility of resistance. She and her son would have virtually no chance of escaping, of being saved. "Why cages, Dennis? We won't go anywhere from here anyway." Veronica tried to reason with Dennis, using flattery and cunning. "Firstly, we don't know the way. We'd get lost in the forest. Secondly, it's so cozy here with you, so nice, quiet, peaceful. There's no one around, complete isolation. Why would we leave such a good place, such a refuge?" Leo watched his mother with wide eyes, listening to her words, and remained silent, as if mesmerized. The woman saw that her son understood her tactic, her game, and was playing along as best he could. He didn't scream, didn't beg to be let go, tried to pretend that he was quite comfortable and even interested here, as long as Dennis didn't guess their true feelings. "These aren't cages, Veronica. This is your room," Dennis explained with a smile, his smile strange. I'm very glad you liked it here, that you appreciated my efforts. I tried hard, cleaned everything and washed it before your arrival, prepared. But you'll still have to live in these rooms, behind bars, for now. I don't trust you yet. I'm afraid of losing you again." Dennis took a bunch of keys rattling metal from his pocket, opened the door to the larger cage, and gestured for Veronica to go inside. She obeyed. There was no choice. What else could she do? Angering a sick person who also possessed an impressive crossbow was life-threatening. Right now he was in a good mood, calm, but everything could change in a second. His mood could sharply shift. They were alone in the middle of a remote forest. There was no help to be expected from anywhere. Then Dennis put Leo in the other section of the cage, the smaller one. Now mother and son were separated by a solid brick wall, and from the rest of the world they were separated by a strong steel grate, whose bars seemed thick. Of course they could see each other when they approached the bars of the cage, and they could even touch hands through them. But this separation was very frightening, caused a feeling of isolation. It would have been much more pleasant to be together, nearby, and be able to hug each other, feel protected. In the corner of her room, Veronica noticed an inflatable mattress covered with a soft blanket with red rose patterns which looked out of place, and also a bucket whose purpose the woman, of course, immediately guessed. Its appearance was eloquent. Dennis had no intention of letting them out for a long time. That was certain. He had prepared thoroughly. The woman suddenly felt nauseous from the stress she had experienced, from fear for the future, from worries about her son. Why him? Why should he suffer through all this? "Well, you're settled in, just as I planned." Dennis sat on the table in front of the cage and looked at his captives with tenderness and pride, his gaze full of affection. "How long I've waited for this moment, Veronica. How I've dreamed of it. I've missed you so much, your voice, your smile." And then he began to tell his story, his life, and the woman understood that she was indeed dealing with a mentally ill person, with a deep pathology. Dennis had been different from other people since childhood, not like everyone else. He began to realize this closer to school age, when he started comparing himself to his peers. He wasn't interested in playing with children, cartoons, ordinary communication. He preferred to sit somewhere in a corner and pour cereal from one glass to another, observing the process. The boy could watch for hours as the grains flowed back and forth. It captivated him, hypnotized him. And Dennis always had a very developed imagination, rich and bizarre. Puddles seemed to him gates to another world, portals, clouds, points from which malicious creatures watched people, trees, evil trolls who had specially disguised themselves as plants to weaken the vigilance of their victims and eat them. The world seemed to the child a dangerous, evil place, full of threats, so he preferred to stay in his room, in safety. The street, the noise of the crowd, open, bright spaces, all this greatly frightened him, caused panic. But his mother? Dennis's mother didn't agree with this state of affairs. She didn't want to put up with his oddities. She was sure that her son needed socialization, communication with other children. The boy didn't attend kindergarten because he was often sick. He didn't want to go out into the yard, was afraid. So his mother dragged him to crowded places, playgrounds, theatres, various parks and squares, forcibly took him out into the world. Sometimes, against Dennis's will, she put him into crowds of children, thinking that her son would gradually join the group, get used to it. But it didn't work. It didn't happen. Children felt that Dennis was different, not like them, and didn't accept him into their games. At best, they avoided him, shunned him. At worst, they teased him, hurt him, mocked him. but his mother was always there, like a hawk. Like a hawk, she swooped down on her son's tormentors and stood protectively in front of her beloved child, defending him. But it was impossible to be constantly under his mother's protection. Sooner or later, you have to go out into the big world. School started, and he was left alone with cruel children and indifferent teachers who didn't care. And generally with this strange, incomprehensible world from which poor Dennis so desperately wanted to hide, to take shelter. At school, Dennis was bullied from the very first grade. They didn't leave him alone. They teased him, pinched him, took his things, pushed him, flicked his nose. But they never seriously hit him, never maimed him. What pleasure was there in fighting with such a helpless weakling who couldn't even fight back? Dennis did poorly in school, didn't socialize with children, kept to himself. Sometimes, coming home from school, he would immediately retreat to his room and lock the door. Here he felt safe and could talk without others listening to his friend, his only friend, but the most loyal and reliable. It was a plump, red-haired boy with bright green eyes, sometimes shining like searchlights in the dark. He first appeared when Dennis was about 5 years old and had been by his side ever since, growing up and changing with Dennis. His name was Walter. Walter was very smart and supported Dennis in everything, gave him advice. It was he who once prompted him to trip Smith, a classmate who bothered Dennis more than anyone else, didn't leave him alone, on the stairs. The guy flew down the steps so dramatically, how he screamed in pain. In the end, he broke his leg and hit his head. He didn't show up at school for a long time afterward, recovering. Beautiful. Thanks, Walter, for the idea. And in general, Walter gave his friend many useful ideas, helped him in life, heating a thermometer on the radiator to pretend to be sick and avoid school, skipping a test, secretly taking money from his mother's purse for sweets, getting rid of the annoying parakeet that had started screeching so unpleasantly in the mornings, preventing him from sleeping. The most interesting thing was that his mother didn't notice Walter. She didn't see him at all. It was especially fun to watch Walter bounce right in front of her, waving his hands and making faces, trying to attract attention, while she continued to go about her business as if nothing was happening, paying him no mind. Dennis would burst into laughter. He found it funny. His mother looked at him with apprehension and surprise, not understanding the reason for his laughter. She didn't understand what was going on, whom he was seeing. Dennis's mother eventually had to admit that something was wrong with her son, serious problems. His behavior wasn't a matter of character, these were oddities of a completely different kind, requiring intervention. The teachers advised her to take the child to a psychiatrist to undergo an examination. That's how Dennis got an official diagnosis, which his mother couldn't accept. She denied it. She kept dragging her son to doctors, taking him to different clinics, in the hope that the verdict wouldn't be confirmed, would turn out to be wrong. But the doctors were unanimous, naming the same illness, the same diagnosis. The boy was transferred to homeschooling so he wouldn't have to attend school. The guy sighed with relief. Finally, he wouldn't have to see the hated faces of classmates and teachers every day, avoid bullying. What could be better than staying home? He wouldn't have endured that torture any longer. But then the treatment began. Pills, endless procedures, talks with psychologists, massages. Soon Dennis realized, because of all this, his connection with Walter, his friend, was disappearing. His friend was appearing less and less often and looked pale, almost transparent, like a ghost. No, Dennis didn't want to lose the only close person who always understood and supported him, and so he categorically refused treatment, rebelled. It was a difficult period in his life. His mother and the doctors insisted, threatened forced treatment. The guy was even hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. But he spat out the pills, lunged at the medical staff, bit, scratched, resisted. In short, he did everything to be left alone, to be left in peace. He fought as best he could for his only friend, for Walter. Walter himself suggested a way out of this situation, gave advice. He came one day and declared that Dennis should behave more compliantly, tolerate massages and physical therapy, and take all the pills except the small blue ones. It was better to spit those out, but discreetly, so no one would see. Those were the ones that chased him away, Walter, made him weak. Dennis did as his friend advised, and life immediately became easier, improved. His mother and the doctors calmed down, thinking the treatment was helping. Dennis was discharged from the hospital, some diagnoses were removed, considered erroneous. His mother was overjoyed. It seemed to her that the situation was improving, her son was getting better. Dennis did somehow gradually learn to interact with other people and the world around him. Sometimes Walter, faithful Walter, who was now always by his side, never disappeared, would tell him how to behave, what to say. It turned out that Dennis's fantasies about the invisible creatures inhabiting this world weren't the ravings of a madman, but interesting, vivid ideas that could be realized. The guy started drawing everything he imagined in his head, creating paintings and posting these works online. Unexpectedly, they found their fans, aroused interest. People wrote to Dennis saying he had talent, advised him to study design. Dennis did just that, graduated from college, and then even got a job, found his place in life. By that time, he had learned to interact with the world, adapted, and was practically indistinguishable from the grey mass of ordinary people. Dennis pretended so well, so convincingly, that he was even officially cleared of his psychiatric diagnosis, considered healthy. Walter advised him on what to answer the doctors and how to behave during tests. No one noticed any more that he was special, or chosen, as Walter, his friend, called him. Dennis graduated from college, got his license, even made some friends he could spend time with. It turned out that not all people were moral degenerates like his classmates, not all were evil and cruel. It was quite possible to communicate with some of them. It was even interesting and pleasant. His mother was happy for her son, saw his successes, understood, of course, that there were oddities in his behavior, some quirks, but she turned a blind eye. After all, Dennis was a creative person. Such people have the right to originality, to peculiar behavior. And then I met you, Veronica. Dennis looked at Veronica through the bars with loving, burning eyes, full of adoration. I understood that you must become mine, and there can be no other way. This is my destiny. And Walter. Walter said I was right, that it was the right decision. Walter? Veronica repeated, her voice full of surprise. So he's still with you, your imaginary friend? Of course, Dennis nodded, his face lit up with a smile. He's standing here now too, next to me, happy for me, a true friend who will never betray. So Dennis fell in love for the first time in his life, immediately with all his heart, his whole soul attached to Veronica as to an ideal. She seemed to him somehow unearthly, incredibly beautiful, kind, smart, the very best woman in the world. Next to her, the man was filled with energy and strength, felt alive. These were incredible sensations he had never experienced before. Dennis found her page on social media and spent hours looking at the woman's photos, admiring her eyes, hair, graceful figure, her whole appearance. He thought he had liked Veronica at their first meeting, that she had reciprocated his feelings. All that remained was a small matter, to meet again at the same game and invite the girl on a date, to take the first step. Dennis thought Veronica would gladly agree. After all, she had looked at him like that, and she was even embarrassed by him, responded to his flirting. But the woman refused, which deeply hurt him, and at the next meeting she behaved very coldly and distantly, despite all of Dennis's attempts to win her favour, to please her. This hurt him, deeply wounded his pride. It also angered him, caused indignation. But Walter, faithful Walter, ordered him not to give up and to continue fighting for his love. And Dennis continued, did not retreat. He wrote to Veronica on social media, waited for her after work with flowers, confessed his feelings, was persistent. But it was all in vain. His efforts yielded no results. The woman was only irritated by his attention. It burdened her. And then she even started dating another man, which was a blow to him. Dennis, of course, tracked him down, found out who he was. At first, he wanted to kill his beloved's chosen one, physically destroy his rival. But Walter talked him out of it, said it was dangerous, and suggested another option, the option with the photos, with the forgery. Dennis liked this idea. It seemed brilliant. He knew how to work with photo editors. His design skills came in handy. It wasn't difficult for him to create realistic pictures in which he and Veronica looked like a happy couple, in love. How much Dennis liked the result of this work. He could admire the resulting photos for hours and even almost believed that the moments captured in them had actually taken place in reality, that it wasn't fiction. But most importantly, Veronica's boyfriend believed this story. It all happened somehow too easily, without much effort. Ben broke up with Veronica. She was free again, just like before. But this didn't change her attitude towards Dennis. On the contrary, upon learning what he had done, Veronica got angry instead of admiring his resourcefulness and persistence, his ability to achieve his goals. That's when Walter suggested the option with the cabin in the forest, with isolation, to his friend. He assured him that Veronica would be with him only if she got to know him better, spent time with him. And since she categorically refused dates and meetings, there was only one option left, the option with the cage, with coercion. We stayed there for several weeks. Veronica told her incredible, nightmarish story in a calm, even voice, showing no sign of emotion, as if recounting someone else's plot. He came every evening and stayed with us until late at night. Sometimes he even slept there too, with us, on the sofa opposite our cages, watching us. He brought delicious food, sometimes from a restaurant, sometimes homemade, cooked by his mother. He fed us as if we were his dear guests, whom he was hosting with honours. And he constantly talked to me, tried to establish contact. Sometimes when he wanted only me to listen, so Leo wouldn't hear, he would give my son a player with music or audiobooks. Leo would gladly put on headphones and go to the corner of the cage, abstracting himself from what was happening. Later, my son told me that during those moments he went into his own world, and it helped him not to go crazy with fear. When Leo couldn't hear, Dennis confessed his love to me, said tender words. He seemed shy, felt awkward in front of the child. He showered me with compliments, said I was the most important person in his life, his destiny, drew pictures of our happy future together. Did the guy really have such strong feelings that he did something like that? Ryan wondered, listening to her story. Everything Veronica said was hard for him to comprehend. It seemed unreal. So you still don't understand, Ryan? Veronica looked at him with slight sadness. He just fixated on me. It wasn't love, it was a mania. I think it was a manifestation of his illness, an exacerbation. His diagnoses were officially removed back then. In adolescence, he was considered healthy. But in reality, He was a deeply sick person. It was obvious. The examination confirmed it later, at the trial. But I saw it myself even before he took me away. I noticed the oddities. And then I became completely convinced, seeing him every day. His imaginary Walter, his friend, terrified me. Who knows what he might order him to do to us, what commands he might give. Veronica behaved evenly, neutrally with Dennis, trying not to provoke him. She pretended that he was pleasant and interesting to her, but she didn't let him get close, kept her distance, not giving him hope. She showed that she was still afraid of him, that he was dangerous to her. After all, he had promised not to even touch her until she herself let him into her life, allowed it. So Veronica had to balance on the edge. On the one hand, show favour so as not to anger him, not to provoke aggression, and on the other hand, remain distant and thereby keep Dennis at a safe distance, not letting him cross the line. It seemed she was quite successful at controlling the situation, but Veronica couldn't know how much longer she would be able to maintain the balance. She was waiting for the moment, the right opportunity. She knew, felt, that sooner or later something would happen that would allow her and her son to break free, to escape. She believed in it with all her heart, never lost hope. Sometimes Dennis became somehow strange, sluggish, weak-willed, lifeless. It was as if he was replaced. His eyes, usually burning with enthusiasm and admiration, suddenly dimmed, became empty. It seemed he even started having severe headaches at such moments. The man clutched his head with his hands, turned pale, trembled. In this state, Dennis frightened Veronica even more. It seemed that his reason temporarily left him. He became unpredictable. What could be expected from a person in this situation when he lost control? All she could do was hope that everything would be all right and he would recover. Usually the attacks, or whatever they were, passed quickly. Dennis would immediately compose himself, come to his senses, and hastily leave the cabin, sometimes without even saying goodbye, as if running away somewhere, escaping. Veronica assumed that after what had happened, the man rushed home to take some important pill that brought him back to reality. One evening, as sometimes happened with him, Dennis suddenly seemed to switch off, as if he had been unplugged. His face turned grey, his eyes became fixed, his gaze glassy. Just a moment ago he had been describing to Veronica how he would take her to a tropical island where they would swim in warm ocean waters, enjoying freedom, and a moment later he had turned into a person indifferent to everything, lost. At that moment, he dropped the key under the table. The key to the cage where Leo was locked, their only chance for salvation. A few minutes passed, which seemed like an eternity. Dennis came to his senses and, as often happened, rushed out of the cabin without looking back, hurrying somewhere. And the key remained lying on the floor, right under the table. Veronica saw that she could reach it if she tried, and she did reach it, straining all her strength. She almost dislocated her shoulder from the tension, but she managed to get the key. It was in her hand. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest, beat in her temples. Were they saved now? Was there a chance? True, there were still many obstacles ahead, much uncertainty. Everything depended on Leo. Could the boy find his way in the dark? Would he get lost in the forest full of dangers? Veronica, with difficulty, opened her son's cage door with trembling hands. He jumped out into the room, his eyes burning, his cheeks flushed with excitement and hope. "Mom, how do I open your door?" Leo asked, his voice full of impatience. "You can't, son. My door won't open. You have to run now, as fast as you can. Find the way to the road, to the highway. Bring help. Save us." Veronica cried, her voice full of despair and hope. Leo nodded briefly, understood that there was no time for hysterics and unnecessary questions. He had to act. He grabbed a nearby chair, confidently smashed the window with it, breaking the glass. He pulled off his sweater over his head, wrapped it around his hands so he wouldn't cut himself on the shards, and removed the remaining glass from the frame. Veronica was amazed at how quickly and decisively her son acted. She herself wouldn't have thought so fast, would have been lost. And then they both, mother and son, heard the sound of an approaching car, the roar of an engine. Dennis had discovered the missing key and decided to return. His plan was falling apart. "Mom, it's him! What should we do?" Panic was in Leo's voice. Fear seized him again. "Run! Just run, son! Run without looking back!" Veronica shouted, pushing him towards the window. And Leo, with the ease of a stray cat, skillfully and quickly slipped out the window, disappearing into the darkness. A few minutes later, Dennis burst into the room, his face distorted with rage. Seeing the broken window and the open cage, he immediately understood everything and roared with anger like a wild animal. Veronica retreated to the farthest corner of her prison, preparing for the worst. She was ready for anything. Dennis would chase Leo or attack her with his fists, vent his anger. But the man suddenly started crying, pitifully like a child. His face was contorted with grief. He sat right on the floor and sobbed, shaking all over, his shoulders trembling. "Why? Why are you doing this to me?" he moaned, addressing Veronica through tears. "I did everything for you. I tried. I would build a house, bring delicious food every day. Did I treat you badly? Why? Why can't you love me, Veronica?" Veronica was bewildered. Her feelings were mixed. In theory, she should feel fear of Dennis and hate him with all her soul for what he had done. But the woman felt very sorry for him. She saw his suffering. What was this? The notorious Stockholm Syndrome, when the victim starts to sympathize with their tormentor. "Dennis," the woman said as gently as possible, trying to calm him down. "Dennis, it's all right. Everything is okay. Everything will be all right. Do you hear me?" He looked up at her with eyes full of tears and hope. His gaze was lost. Dennis didn't look like a dangerous criminal, a maniac now. Before Veronica was a confused, deeply sick person, suffering from his illness. He started confessing his love to her again, talking about his adoration. Veronica said something in response, kept Dennis talking, stalling for time, every second. If only Leo could make it to the road. If only he would be noticed. If only people would notice the little boy and help him, call the police. And then Veronica had no idea how much time passed before people in uniform, armed and determined, burst into the cabin. How glad she was to see them. It was real salvation. 2 of them immediately restrained Dennis, who offered no resistance, and led him outside. The others began to search the room, examine the crime scene. One of the police officers let Veronica out of the cage, opening the door with a key. What happiness it was for the woman to be able to leave the stuffy cabin, to walk in the forest, the fresh air, nature, space. Her imprisonment was over. The nightmare had ended. Freedom, the best thing there can be in life, its main blessing. Veronica clearly realized this at that moment, felt its taste. "Well, and before that, you pretty much know everything from the news. The end of the story, thankfully," Veronica smiled at Ryan, concluding her story. Ryan didn't reply, lost in thought. He was thinking about himself, about Sarah. No, it wasn't by chance that fate had brought him together with Veronica. It wasn't accidental that he was in that place at that time. Her story. It helped him look at his own behavior, his actions, in a new light. Sarah. He was pursuing her, just as Dennis had pursued Veronica. His behavior was similar to that of a maniac. If Dennis had some justification, a psychiatric diagnosis, an illness, then he, Ryan, had none, no excuses. He had simply gotten it into his head that Sarah had to be his, no matter what, as if the girl was just an object that had no right to her own opinion, to her own choice. Ryan decided to call Sarah today without delay, to apologize for his intrusive behavior, for the stalking, for everything he had done, and to promise that he would stop trying to win her affection, would leave her alone.